They laughed at him, mocked him, and even said he didn't belong there. By the next day, the tables turned, and he owned the company. At a sleek, high-end car dealership, the kind that prides itself on luxury and exclusivity, the atmosphere buzzed with polished confidence. Gleaming cars lined the floor, each worth more than most people's yearly salary. The sales team, dressed in sharp suits, stood ready, scanning every customer who walked through the glass doors, quickly assessing who was worth their time. That's when he walked in. An elderly black man, his clothes simple and unassuming, stepped inside. He didn't fit their idea of a typical buyer. No designer brands, no flashy jewelry, nothing to scream wealth. He had a quiet demeanor, carrying himself with a kind of calm confidence that didn't demand attention. But the employees noticed him, exchanging glances and smirks. Their subtle gestures said it all. Why is he even here? One sales associate muttered to another, their voices low, but their amusement obvious. Still, the man walked further in, eyes scanning the room as if he belonged there, even though they clearly didn't think so. When he approached one of the cars, his hand lightly brushing the polished hood, an employee made their move. Instead of offering help, they sneered. "Sir, these cars aren't for everyone." The tone wasn't just dismissive, it was degrading. The man looked at them, his face calm, but his eyes said something else. He didn't argue, didn't raise his voice. Instead, he simply asked, "Can I speak to the manager?" That question was met with a laugh and an answer that would set the stage for everything to come. The elderly black man approached the sleek sports car, his hand tracing the polished metal with quiet appreciation. It was a stunning vehicle, its price tag enough to make most people hesitate. But his demeanor showed no uncertainty, just genuine interest. He turned to the nearest salesperson and asked calmly, "How much for this one?" The response came almost instantly, dripping with disdain. The salesman didn't even glance at the car. "That's one of our top models," he said, crossing his arms. "It's probably not in your budget." His colleague, standing a few steps away, chuckled, failing to hide his amusement. The man's expression didn't waver. He simply nodded, as if to acknowledge their assumptions, and asked again, "Can I speak to the manager?" His voice was even, but the request seemed to ignite more disrespect. The salesman smirked. "The manager's busy," he said. "He doesn't really handle situations like this." Another salesperson chimed in, unable to hold back a sarcastic quip. "Maybe try the used lot down the street. Might be more your speed." Their laughter echoed softly in the pristine showroom. The elderly man's gaze shifted between them. He didn't react with anger or frustration, though the sting of their words was unmistakable. Instead, he gave a small, almost imperceptible smile. Without another word, he turned and walked out of the dealership, the faint sound of their laughter trailing behind him. What the staff failed to notice, or perhaps didn't care to see, was the thoughtful look in his eyes as he left. This wasn't a defeated man. It was someone who had already decided on his next step. They had dismissed him as insignificant, unworthy of their time or respect, but their actions had sparked something far greater. Behind the scenes, as the dealership returned to its usual rhythm, the elderly man made a single phone call. On the other end of the line, a trusted advisor listened as he outlined his plan, one that would turn the tables in a way no one saw coming. The staff's dismissal wasn't just an insult. It was the catalyst for a lesson they wouldn't soon forget. Little did they know, the man who'd walked away so quietly was about to make a decision that would change everything. The dealership opened the next morning like any other day, the staff moving with the same confidence they always did. The air was filled with their usual conversations, laughter, and occasional chatter about customers they deemed unimportant. No one thought twice about the elderly man from the day before. He had been a blip on their radar, an easy target for their ridicule, and quickly forgotten. But outside, something unusual was unfolding. A convoy of sleek black cars pulled into the lot. From them emerged a group of sharply dressed individuals, briefcases in hand and purposeful expressions on their faces. The staff noticed immediately, exchanging curious glances. These weren't the usual customers. They looked official, serious, and entirely out of place for what they thought would be a typical morning. Among them, to the staff's shock, was the elderly man. He stepped out of one of the cars, dressed slightly sharper, but still carrying the same calm confidence as before. Now, however, he wasn't alone, and his presence was impossible to ignore. One by one, the suited professionals entered the dealership, their arrival silencing the usual hum of the showroom. The salespeople, once so smug, found themselves frozen, unsure of how to react. Before anyone could muster a greeting or an apology, the elderly man approached the center of the room, his team gathering around him. "Good morning," he said, his voice steady and polite. "I'd like to meet with your manager now." His words, spoken with quiet authority, cut through the tension like a knife. The same employee who had dismissed him yesterday now stumbled over his words. One moment," he muttered, before disappearing into the back. The manager, alerted to the situation, arrived quickly, his smile forced, and his tone overly polite. He extended his hand to the elderly man, but instead of shaking it, the man gestured toward his team. "I think we have some business to discuss," he said. As papers were laid out, the truth became clear. Overnight, the elderly man had bought controlling interest in the dealership. The staff, who had mocked him for his appearance, now stood in stunned silence, watching as the tables turned. The air grew heavy with a realization that would soon transform everything. The dealership's showroom, once filled with confidence and casual arrogance, now felt like a courtroom. The elderly man stood at the center, his calm demeanor unchanged, while the staff, who had ridiculed him just a day earlier, shifted uncomfortably in their spots. Beside him, his team of lawyers and advisors were arranging documents, their presence alone enough to command respect. The manager, who had initially entered with a smile plastered across his face, was now visibly uneasy. "Sir, I am not sure I understand," he stammered. The elderly man glanced at him, his expression measured. It's simple, he said. As of this morning, I own this dealership. A collective gasp rippled through the room. The staff, the same people who had laughed at him, looked at one another in disbelief. Some tried to whisper amongst themselves, but the weight of the revelation silenced most of them. The man turned his gaze to the employees who had been so quick to judge him. "Yesterday, I walked into this building as a customer," he said, his voice calm but deliberate. "I was met with disrespect, mockery, and assumptions about who I was based solely on how I looked." The employees avoided his eyes, some fidgeting nervously. He continued, his tone unwavering. "What none of you cared to consider was that the way you treat people, every person, matters. Not just for your job, but for who you are as human beings." One of the younger salespeople, who had been among those mocking him, tried to speak. "Sir, I am sorry. I didn't mean." The man raised a hand, cutting him off gently but firmly. "Apologies mean nothing if you don't learn from them," he said. "This is about more than just me. This is about how you treat anyone who walks through these doors." He paused, letting the silence hang for a moment before delivering the final blow. "As the new owner, I expect every customer to be treated with dignity and respect, regardless of what you think they can afford. If that's not something you can manage, you're free to leave now." The staff stood frozen, the reality sinking in. The power dynamic had shifted completely, and the man they had underestimated now held their futures in his hands. The message was clear. This wasn't just a lesson, it was a reckoning. The realization of what had happened sank in quickly. The once confident sales team, who had mocked the elderly man without a second thought, now stood awkwardly in his presence. Some of them tried to save face with weak smiles or hurried apologies, but the weight of their actions was undeniable. Their arrogance had cost them far more than they ever imagined. The elderly man's words hung in the air as he looked around the room, his calm presence commanding attention. True to his character, he didn't shout or berate anyone. Instead, he simply handed down decisions. Some employees were dismissed on the spot, their behavior too blatant to ignore. Others were given a chance to prove themselves under the new standards he was setting. In the days that followed, the dealership underwent rapid changes. The man implemented policies focused on respect and integrity. Customer service was overhauled, and new training programs emphasized treating every person with dignity. Word spread quickly about the shift in management and the new direction the dealership was taking. Interestingly, the man didn't gloat about his victory or dwell on the humiliation he'd faced. Instead, he focused on building a positive environment. Former customers, who had also experienced prejudice at the dealership, returned, curious about the changes. New customers arrived, drawn by the story of the man who had transformed his experience of disrespect into a powerful lesson for everyone. In time, the dealership thrived, not just financially, but as a symbol of fairness and humility. The same employees who had once judged him now worked under his leadership, understanding fully the impact of their actions. And for the man, the experience wasn't about revenge. It was about ensuring no one else would be treated as he had been ever again. Under the elderly man's leadership, the dealership became an entirely different place. What once had a reputation for arrogance and exclusivity was now known for fairness and respect. Customers of all walks of life felt welcomed, and word of the dealership's transformation spread far beyond the local community. The man, however, remained humble throughout. He didn't flaunt his victory or dwell on the insults had endured. Instead, he focused on creating a workplace that valued integrity above all else. Employees who aligned with this vision flourished, while those who couldn't adapt moved on. It wasn't just about cars anymore. It was about changing the culture. Former customers who had once been dismissed or treated poorly began returning, curious to see the changes for themselves. They found a dealership that now prioritized service over assumptions, humility over pride. Sales soared, not because of flashy marketing, but because people respected the man who had turned an act of prejudice into a beacon of fairness. For the elderly man, it was never about the money or proving anyone wrong. It was about making a difference. And as the dealership thrived, it stood as a reminder that kindness, dignity, and respect are the true measures of success. Respect is a choice that transcends appearances, wealth, or status. This story reminds us that judging others based on assumptions can lead to missed opportunities and profound regret. True success lies in treating everyone with dignity, as small actions can create lasting impacts. The way we treat others reflects who we are more than anything else ever could. Want more inspiring stories like this? Subscribe now or watch the next video.